Welcome to part 2 of our discussion for the UTPB History Department's project on Japanese-American internment during World War II. In the Supreme Court case of Hirabayashi versus U.S. in 1943, the court had by a 9-0 majority upheld the curfew for all people of Japanese descent. The case that followed up and justified and validated the internment camps, however, was Korematsu versus the United States in 1944. It was decided by a 6-3 majority, and the Supreme Court basically upheld Hirabayashi and allowed for the continued internment of Japanese Americans. In all, about 117,000 or so were interned at 10 camps in 7 western states. Again, 2/3 of these were United States citizens, born in the United States and theoretically entitled to all of the rights of U.S. citizenry. It's worth pointing out that there was also a smattering of about 5,000 Germans and Italians who were interned, mostly in Missoula, Montana, and in Bismarck, North Dakota. However, the overwhelming majority of these were nationals, in other words, citizens of those countries against whom we were also waging war. And the program didn't reach the same scope or degree as the internment of the Nisei, the native-born Japanese Americans in the West. Hostility towards the Japanese in the United States declined once the United States went on the offensive in the Pacific. And in 1943, the Army actually started accepting recruits for an all-Nisei unit from the camps. 1,200 signed on. One has to imagine the numbers would have been significantly larger if it weren't for the Japanese-American internment. Indeed, 5,766 renounced their U.S. citizenship. They were allowed to serve in the armed services, and in all, after the initial sign-up, about 33,000 served. The 1,200 who served in the elite 442nd Combat Team in Italy was the most decorated combat force in the U.S. Army, and it was, of course, segregated for the Japanese Americans exclusively. After his re-election in 1944, FDR rescinded the evacuation order, and by the end of 1945, the government had closed the camps. It's worth pointing out that in 1968, Congress agreed to reimburse these Japanese Americans who were still alive for the property they had lost. And in 1988, Congress enacted legislation that included a formal apology and about $20,000 in restitution to each of the 60,000 surviving internees. Nonetheless, in retrospect, and even for many at the time, this is clearly one of the dark moments in U.S. history. Thank you very much.